Hello and welcome to the program. I am Suren. What I am revealing this time needs not be taken as a sign of bitterness against any belief, organization, or any groups of people. I do not support any of these characteristics of anybody within the worldwide communities of humankind. My statements are based on observable facts discovered as general realities of our current world. As it is often stated, while religion can involve faith, it is not necessarily the blind faith which solely leads to control people. Some interpretations of faith within religion involves trust and confidence based on hope for some kind of evidence, while others may be more taken to blind faith, especially when used to manipulate or control others. The idea that religion is inherently controlling is a simplification in description, as religion can, in a sense, also provide a social structure, moral guidance of the community. Let's consider the issues of faith and evidence. Many religions incorporate elements of faith which are not necessarily blind. For instance, some religious perspectives argue that faith can be based on reason, evidence, and personal experiences. Even the assumed ones would so do. Some religious believers argue that their faith is only based on a combination of personal experience, historical accounts, and philosophical arguments, not simply an absence of evidence. Examples of faith are presented as reasonable and based on evidence can be found in various beliefs in Christianity, for instance. What about the blind faith and control? Some critics argue that religion can be used to promote blind faith, which can be a tool for manipulation and control. On the other hand, some sociological perspectives suggest that religion can serve as an agent of social control by establishing norms, values, and probably even some social order. Let us not forget that there exists also religious abuse, and it is a form of psychological manipulation and can occur when religious teachings are used to control individuals or groups of people. There are many examples of this amidst those oftentimes originating in the Americas from several decades ago. As it has been often discussed, how religious belief can lead to irrational psychological decisions, especially when they conflict with evidence and the reason. Social role of religions. Religion can provide social support, a sense of community, and moral guidance. It can offer a framework for understanding the world and one's place in it. Let us not forget that many people may find comfort, meaning, and purpose in their religious beliefs. At the end, there are those who may use religion indeed to promote blind faith for control. This does not need to be understood as the only way religion is practiced, because it's not. In fact, religion can promote faith, social support, and personal meaning for some, and it can be used for both positive and negative purposes. In a debate, it was said, blind faith is not okay because they don't let people to think for themselves. There's a truth in there. Blind faith oftentimes prohibits people from finding out different answers to the meaning or origins of life, and it can make people more ignorant than logical. There are many hateful and heretical theorist communities all around today's world that have very traditional views on things, and being raised in such communities just makes blind faith worse. That is why the newest denominations that practice such beliefs as baptisms may be better for faith than being born into it and following it blindly. It could permit them to find different pathways, and if they so choose. This is not being said as anything hateful or in a discriminatory sense. However, there are those who can be just as bad as the religious ones, amongst, say, the atheists, for instance. One author had mentioned that blind faith is not okay because Christians don't subscribe to it or practice it. In the Christian Bible, faith is considered as evidence. Defining biblical faith as in making an assumption of truth, supposedly based on enough evidence to make that assumption reasonable. Belief is always a choice, as it should be, and needs to be based upon some form of evidence. When one truly believes that by sitting on a chair, for instance, one would not consider it twice whether it will hold you, and that is called faith. And you may have sat on those chairs many times over, and yet you cannot be absolutely certain that it will hold you this time, because things do break on occasions. But you may make an assumption of truth based on enough evidence in your mind to make it reasonable for you to make that assumption, and so you sit down nevertheless. And that is really faith. It truly is a conscious choice. In truth, all life works this way because we can never know what lies ahead. Every time you turn a doorknob, you're expressing some form of faith, because oftentimes you have turned the door knob and it opened the door, So, you turn that knob in full confidence and move forward. But it does not always work the way it did for a while, does it? What if you turn that knob and the door does not open? It is usually then that you make an assumption of truth based on enough evidence to make it reasonable for you to make the decision. And you walk forward in faith. We know chairs hold people, and turning the doorknob opens the doors. And when you turn the key, the car starts. But we are not sure whether it will always start. And this evidence may be very compelling. It is certainly a conscious choice. We seem to use our knowledge to try and figure out what to do about it if it doesn't work. Same as when we dial our phone, which may also be considered in a very simplistic way as an act of faith, assuming it will work, and it does not work, and so then we try to get help. The Bible seems to have that evidence, which appears to provide faith for some people. Obviously, Bible does not teach to close one's eyes and jump off the cliff, as some cults encourage people do. Of course, not in literal terms, but in a symbolic way. And some people prefer to interpret that sort of a command, indeed, to jump off the cliff, believing that they will be living forever, for instance, in the supposed paradise. They read about Jesus turning the water into wine, healing the sick people, casting out demons, and teaching them all about faith. And they would probably be unable to understand the intricacies of resurrection until there was an evidence. And it seems that the Bible has the reasonable kind of a story to make people believe that it really exists. But probably not through the exercise of faith. When reading the Bible, one discovers that people came to Jesus to be healed because they have heard about other people who had been healed. Well, at least the people have heard him teach all about it. And their faith, based on evidence, as they believe, they gain new knowledge from it. Again, based on that knowledge, as many have learned from Jesus. And so, people came to him for more requests. Resurrection, too, can be considered as an assumption of truth, based on supposed evidence that makes it reasonable to hold that assumption. But how much do we know if the story of Jesus' ascension was real and true? For it is a story told to people of little faith. And when they began to have true faith, as again they assumed, then they believed in what Jesus apparently has told them to believe. That I have risen from the dead. As in Matthew chapter 8, verse 4, Jesus encourages people he just healed can show the evidence that it was true, as in John chapter 14, 11 seems to be that the Bible is based upon evidence, as it is mentioned, in uncertainty, that there are many people believing in this and ready to confirm that the biblical or the Christian faith is never blind. Can religious belief drive people to very bad decisions based on blind belief? Again in the Bible, in the Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 5 and 6, it reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." In Isaiah chapter 26, 4 it says, "Trust in the Lord forever. The Lord God is an everlasting rock." It is said in the Bible, Psalm chapter 27, 5, "He will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock." The Bible asks you to trust in God. Many people take that at its word and indeed trust blindly. Maybe you are not one of them, but blind belief and blind trust in a God can lead to very bad decisions indeed. The best decisions are made when based on real information and on reality. If you would stand on the roof of a tall building and you know that you should not jump off it, because the reality is that you may fall if the distance is far, and you may die. No amount of trust in a God is going to save you. No amount of trust in a God is going to save you from dying when you step into a fire either. We all need to make our decisions based on reality, not based on trust in God. Remember the wise words? God helps those who help themselves. Good point. When people do begin to make decisions based on trusting God rather than based on reality, then things can go very badly. Some parents make, say, childcare decisions when those decisions are just based on trust in God and not based on reality. I have experienced this with my own ex-family. People also make bad medical decisions, but those decisions are just based on faith in God and not based on a competent medical authority, such as the blood transfusions, and many have lost their lives, and many children have been left with no caring parent. That is a fact. Blind faith is indeed hazardous to children's health or anybody else's. The best decisions are made based on real information, based on reality, and the real truth, not assumed truth, as with some cultist beliefs like the Jehovah's Witnesses. So, the best choice is to do your homework to find out your real facts around something, and then making the best decision, which can only be based on information you have after a logical and thorough research. It was said often that God doesn't lie. My question still remains. Which God? Blind beliefs without any evidence or reason to back it up leads to very unpredictable outcomes. Science, on the other hand, as I understand, is one of the few disciplines that actively seeks at every point to discourage blind faith, blind belief, and remove the need for it by searching for realities as much as possible. Indeed, Abrahamic theology is about the rejection of man-made gods and religions, though that message has been truly obscured. Regardless, all those beliefs, whether religious or not, are the actual problem. If religion or other blind beliefs were abolished somehow, perhaps for the time being, at least in our dreams, we would still have different types of people arguing about different belief systems and cults, which are not very likely to disappear very soon. For tomorrow, not all people of religious traditions subscribe to making decisions based on some external doctrine, especially as in the case of certain cults. If we would remove religion altogether, we will not be able to remove the human ignorance. Likewise, all of religion is not necessarily ignorant, but even though most of the religious people are ignorant in some ways, many people would definitely not agree that we would have any point to dwell in this discussion as far as they are concerned, because they do not believe according to their own assumptions and know how, and would probably suggest that we should pray enough and jump the building anyway and wait for how God saves us. I've seen this happen too. Why is there that certain saying which goes like this, repeating, God helps those who help themselves? How do we need to understand that? I will leave it to you for the moment. One of those next times we can discuss that. One other question had been asked about why Quran had no female prophets, and were they then anti-feminist? That is quite an interesting consideration that you might think about. Maybe we should leave it to the experts to explain. Not all the older religions are high control religions. For instance, exercising strict control on people's actions, sexuality, interactions, friendships, and relationships, as with Jehovah's Witnesses of today. There's a book called When Religion Hurts You, written by a therapist specializing in religious trauma, or gets into details on what high control religions are doing and why they are so dangerous. The phenomenon of high controlled religions is extremely widespread, so that there are associations of people who feel forced to leave those religions. Associations with health of other people navigating the potential fallout. Probably questioning religious tenets or giving up religion can, in the case of high-control religions, results in terrible consequences, ranging from ostracism with family and friends cutting ties as with Jehovah's Witnesses do, and who literally destroy families and individuals, even committing those who outright physical harm in their motto, as in some Islamic countries. High control dogmatism is most widespread among the religious people than among atheists. That religions are more dangerous than atheism or even agnosticism. That is also more common for religious families to indoctrinate their children in such a way that makes it hard for them to leave the religion than for non-religious families doing the same. One needs to be aware of the phenomenon applying to sex, like Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, evangelical Christians, and to a certain degree to some Muslims. It may well apply to all religions too. If you know more, please add to the discussion. We need to also consider Western countries like US, Canada, UK, Europe, and Australia. Question: why are there associations of ex-Muslims, ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, but there are no associations of ex-atheists? A documentary with the title Women Leaving Islam, which begins by mentioning that many of the women contacted had refused an interview because they feared the repercussions. But there are no ex-atheists to fear the repercussions if they talk about how they gave up their belief. Then there is a talk about yet another post. Those who leave their faith can bring shame and dishonor to their family, and as a result, they may experience emotional and physical abuse. I have most definitely experienced this when all my children have rejected me, and it became their tradition ever since they were abducted under the careful supervision of the cult their mother adhered to. Indeed, my wife hated me absolutely, in the name of love of God, and completely shunning me, which again was another Jehovah's Witness trend, and sometimes completely being disowned from one's immediate family, relatives, and community at large is not uncommon. Even my brother hates me now. They create confusion, isolation, and loneliness, often following, which can lead to anxiety, depression, and even to self-harm. It's not my way of living, of course. For those who stay with their families, there is a risk of physical abuse with some religions, commonly referred to as honor-based violence, which we discover amidst some of the fanatical Muslim communities. In extreme cases, it can escalate to murder, and it's also known as honor killings. The meetings of the Council for Muslims of North America are often guarded by armed police. As such, they receive additional threats. However, such conditions you will never hear from atheists, would you? We understand that not all theist traditions are the same. Neither it is like that with atheism. In fact, it wouldn't make any sense to find any ex-atheist organization because there is no such conversion at all. They don't need to make a separate group based on being ex-atheists, because they already have a group anyway. Besides, atheism is not a religion, so you don't leave a community, and nor any feeling of pressure. Finally, I'd like to say that fanaticism is not exclusive to religion, nor any other social groups, such as football clubs. God is a challenge to the level of self-overcoming that would be necessary if one wished to have perspective, seeing alignment with a truly infinite, eternal, all-loving, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-present, and having the source of everything that constitutes a conceptual, unified connection between all things, which entails all science, all wisdom, all knowledge of all history everywhere, understanding every spiritual tradition, not only externally, but internally, which is all, of course, impossible. But it also seems like the only serious perspective one could have about God that is actually found on the properties of God that most people at least abstractly agree on operating to make endless horizons beyond the self in every direction to connect to everything else, and which incidentally is stimulating, inspiring, humbling. It also means that every religion, according to the agreed upon properties of God, that they generally affirm, to the extent that said religion attempts to make claims on truth, that amount the rejection, exclusive ownership, or closure, rather than providing a method for getting beyond, would seem to amount to a form of idolatry. Another argument was about Christianity being what it is assisted in the West to become what it is. All the wonderful promises and prophecies seem to be just appeasing certain types of followers of a religious groups constantly. What proof do we have that Muhammad, for instance, split the moon? Why are we here? And why is the universe infinite? Is there really a creator God? Is there a soul? Is there an afterlife? And what religion is right? These are all unanswerable questions that people can waste a lot of valuable time and effort trying to find an answer. The very best thing at this stage is to focus in this particular life we are living, and on what is actually known and is true. What we know is following a wise, moral, ethical path is healthier for our minds, and doing so can reduce both suffering of the people and their wants for their own selves. The more pure our minds become, the more joy and happiness we experience. This is a fact. Just reading all about it is not enough. One needs to incorporate this into one's daily practice, and it must really become everyone's compass. Most religions and philosophies of such great codes of conduct, although some of those are very universal, but not all of them are, best to compare them and indeed choose what makes most sense to you. And remember, we are all capable of discernment. If there is a God, and you have not been worshipping Him in your life before you die, you may have been told that you are going to hell. Would you then try to avoid hell and actually found the right God, if there is one? One other said, if Jesus had to die for our sins, then God is not at all powerful. And another said, Abrahamic God seems for not being validated and honored as an excuse to torture people forever in the hellfire. Yet, one other said, if God made everything that leads to sin, He should punish Himself first, not us. I shall leave it with you now. We will meet you again by the next episode. Be happy, keep smiling, and thank you.